Condominiums, a lot of controversy about what's going to happen if people who bought them a couple of years ago have gotten caught with higher interest rates than they ever expected and larger down payment requirements than they ever expected. Let's talk about that today on Real Estate Chat. I'm Robert Eade, and we're also always with John DePere.
That's me.
So today we're going to do it a little bit different. That we watched in the newspaper, Toronto Star of all places, where someone started to pay attention to this potential dilemma. And back in November, here's this lady I've never met before, put out a provocative headline: developers are hitting the brakes. Pandemic buyers are panicked as appraisals come in short. Is this the end of Toronto's condominium? Now that is a very good, albeit clickbait, headline for what this article goes into, because she talks to all of the component parts of the transaction. She talks to buyers who put 20% down deposit, which is probably a down payment too, 2 years ago. She talks to people who are in the business of selling these condos. She talks to builders. She talks to lawyers of builders. She talks to the complete spectrum of people who are involved in this potential transaction, that and mortgage broker, that what's going to happen if a whole bunch of these buyers don't have enough money to come up with the new amount. Was appraised here before expected, but now it appraises here, and now they got to make up the difference in cash. How are they going to handle that? And the mortgage that they're going to get now, instead of being at 2%, is going to be at 6%. And so the payments are way out of whack. So that if they were going to live there, or if they were going to rent it, or if they were going to try and assign it to somebody else, now it's just not working out. It's not working out. What are they going to do? So John is going to be our everyman who knows something about real estate, knows something about being in Toronto, and knows something about the condo hysteria that we've seen for the last 15, 20 years. And we'll answer the questions.
So, Robert, you also pointed out to me, in fact, that there's a second article to this, and let me pull it up. And that's published just a few days ago, January 11 of this year. Agents report surge in home buyers desperate to get out of deals as rates continue to soar. Same writer as you previously mentioned with the previous article. And literally, it's just an article about exactly what they're saying about that. There's a lot of worry. There's changes in the valuation, and property prices have dropped. Reconstruction prices have dropped. And in fact, it's interesting to point out that this is, you could consider this part 2 of our real estate chat, because on pre-construction, because in our previous episode, we talked about pre-construction subdivision homes, detached semis and townhouses. And now, of course, the spillover happens with condos here as well.
That's exactly right. Condos are only a little bit different in that they have a longer lead time. So the ones that are under construction are already 40 stories high and are building the interior and sending out the notice for occupancy and asking the buyers whether indeed their mortgage commitments are still valid. They were probably purchased 5-7 years ago. And so they may be all right, which is what these articles come to say. But what about the person who, in this time of the Bank of Canada assured me that interest rates were going to be very low and for a very long time, so I'm going to borrow money at 2% because that's almost free money when you subtract inflation from it. I'm going to buy myself an investment property. I'm going to buy myself a place to live. I see the real estate market is booming and I want to buy a place to live and I don't want to miss out on this great big boom. So all those people who bought in 18, 19, 20, 21, in the expectation that, as we said last week, the trees are going to grow to the sky, and they had 20 years of history to say that they did, what's going to happen to them? And what's going to happen to their development, which is part 1. What's going to happen to their development? Each one of these contracts with the builder says that you have an economic viability. He comes to a point, or she, whoever the builder is, and says, I've only sold a small amount, or I've sold a certain number of these at X price, but I can get much more for it. Whatever his reason, economic viability is undefined, not real. Anyway, it's in the favor of one of the parties. And so that party can say, sorry, the deal's off and give the money back. And the other side can just be mad. They can try and sue, but the contract says sorry. So those ones that just aren't going to get built, we can't really worry about because there's no deal. And somebody that thought that they were going to get something in 2019 and pay 2025 price for it, and by the time it was built in 2025, make even more money on it. Well, there's just no deal there, but they didn't lose any money. They got all their money back. Somebody who bought and now the property is about to give occupancy, that's the interim closing, so that you can move in if you want to, but and you have to start paying taxes and a proportion amount of expenses, but you don't have the registration yet until certain more things are done. And those are approaching, and the person now has to come up with the money for the closing, and the appraisal comes in light, and he's not getting 2% like we said before. He's going to get 6% mortgage, and he can't afford it. He says, this is not what I bargained for. This is not what I wanted. And again, we've got a different couple of scenarios. You got the clean hands fella who bought it and he wants to live in. He's got 2.5 children and he wants to live in there, and he thinks it's swell for where he's going to develop his family that's close to his work. You got somebody else who is sick and tired of the stock market, and so he's decided to buy a condominium and have one tenant, and that's going to be part of his RRSP. And then in 2 years, he's going to buy another one. He's going to give another tenant. He's going to be a very small time property manager, property owner, and he's going to manage the risk of being a landlord. But in 25 years, he'll have all his mortgages paid off, and he can sell the units, and that's going to be his retirement fund. So there's that guy. And then there's somebody else, a big woman too, I'm just using my old school terminology, who bought with the intention of 25 minutes before closing, getting out of the deal by doing what we call a flip, or more properly, we call an assignment. So that person, each one of those situations will be different, but they are an investor, and they know that they put some money in there at risk, and they're risked it because they thought they were going to get a reward. And if the reward was great, they would be happy and glad to pay a little bit of tax on it. And if they found out a sneaky way that they could avoid all kinds of tax and pay no HST, all the better, even though all those loopholes seem to be closing or being eliminated. And what we're finding out is via this set of articles by this very fine reporter, that some people went around to 4 or 5 or more condominium developments and used the very same mortgage commitment paper and said, oh yes, I'm qualified, put down the deposit of 15 or 20%, and use the very same mortgage application every single time. And so they're overextended, let's say. So they're overextended to such extent that they just can't possibly complete those deals, and they never intended to, or probably, let's say probably, what do I know? I don't know their mind. Probably didn't want to. So there's a couple of different buyers. Now you got the developer who, oh, I was supposed to ask questions to John. Okay, so what do we think from our articles here? Do we think is going to happen with the developer, the builder, who's now, his lawyer says 25% of the people who said they were going to close on the first of next month aren't ready. And another who were supposed to close the month after that, half of them can't do the deal either. What do we do?
Well, you know what, let's flip this around, because and as much as I'd like to think I know a lot about real estate, but Robert, you've been in this business several generations longer than I have. And the interesting thing is this, let's flip it around. Robert, has this happened before?
Oh, good question. Yes. Yes. And the only difference, this is in the 70s. There was a run up of interest rates, and people were buying like crazy. There was a run up of prices, and people were buying like crazy. And then all of a sudden, it stopped. They introduced something called April the 9th, 1974. I got my license about 2 weeks before that. My registration, pardon me. And interest rates hit 12% for the first time for a first mortgage, where it had been like 7, 8, 9% for years and years and years before that. Anyway, the difference then was builders, particularly of high rise, would build the building. They would build it very similar to a rental building, except they put ensuite laundries in. They would have a recreational facility or something or other. But so they build the whole thing on spec and then sell them as it went, especially since the market was so hot, they would sell them all out. So some people bought them and moved in, and then all of a sudden they said, look, this is underwater. This I can't pay for this. The mortgages are too high. And so they all got what they call quitclaim deeds. They said, I'm sorry, I don't want to go personally bankrupt, but I just can't make this go. And so they gave back via quitclaim deed the property to the builder, except the builder said, hey, just a second, this is a high ratio mortgage. This was insured by CMHC. And the deal with CMHC was they would take over the property and indemnify the mortgage company who, paid the money to the builder. And all of a sudden, CMHC, Government of Canada, owns hundreds of condos all over the place. And they're not the ritzy ones. They're the ordinary guy ones. And they're the ones that maybe have the least demand for. There's nothing special about them. They're just serviceable. Anyway, so this is a big problem. Now CMHC has to own the whole thing. They're empty. What do? Rent them? For example, Dixon Road. My mother used to live across the street from Dixon Road over there. So they turned them into a immigration hotel, a refugee hotel, all those buildings on Dixon Road. It changed the whole complexion of the neighborhood. Never mind because they were used for another purpose than what they were intended, which was single family condominium dwellings. Now, this was a big problem all over Ontario, just like it's now going to be a big problem all over Ontario with these potential failures of built deals. And so the Ontario government came up with a plan they called AHOP, Assisted Home Ownership Plan. And what they did is they said, okay, starting now for new construction, you can buy one as long as it's valued at under $47,000 on an assisted home ownership plan. You put 5% down, and it's an 11-year plan. In the first year, you pay 5% less than what you should be paying monthly, and it'll be a negative amortization. The next year, 4% less. Next year, 3% less. And the renewal 6th year, you pay what you should be paying on whatever the mortgage rate should be. And then in the second 5-year term, you would pay 5%, or 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5% too much to repay what you didn't pay in the first 5-year period. And it was going to solve the whole problem. So everybody went around, put minimum down payment, got these low monthly payment, negative amortization, graduated payment plan is what it was called. And they bought up all the inventory. Well, they bought up all the inventory, except they weren't worth $47,000. They were only worth $38,000. So pretty soon people said, oh my, what did I buy this for? I was induced to buy it because of a stimulation plan, and now I'm stuck. So this is where the quit claims come from as well. So which is where we were before. And so
how much of that was speculation though? So it's interesting to note, because I've seen this market, and so I haven't seen the market that you were in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And did we see speculation at the same levels back then as we see now, where, you bring up an interesting point with CMHC. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of these deals are being inked with CMHC involved, because they are pre-con, number one. Number two, the deposit structure is huge. Number three, the amount of money that has gone down in terms of the most latest projects have been huge. So back then, was there a lot of spec buying as we're seeing now, where they're not expecting to live in the condos, but they're buying it, hoping to offload it at a higher price, then rinse and repeat, buy the next one, and so forth?
Okay. The difference then is the builder was speculating. He was building the whole building on spec. He didn't have a buyer when he dug the hole, but he was able to get financing on that basis, because they said, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, so we'll give you the financing. Now it's all different. They're pre-sold now, because you can't get financing to dig a hole until you've got 70% sold. And CMHC, because they lost so much money, they raised their premiums from 0.75% to like nearly 4% as a CMHC. Now, the reason why they want 20% deposit is because if you have a small deposit, you'll walk from that. If you have 20% deposit, then you're not going to walk from that. It's very unlikely the market will fall 20%. And so it'll eat up all your deposit. You just continue with the deal. And that was like part of the financing as well. The lender's involved in setting the rules, and CMHC is involved in setting the rules that the builder follows and that the buyers have to follow, because everybody's doing the same thing, because CMHC doesn't want to get burned so bad again. The lenders don't want to get burned again so bad so recently. So the question is, everybody's speculating. And everybody's playing the game of the trees will grow to the sky. The appraisers are hitting them. Yeah, that's what it should be. Now they got to do it what it should be. So people are getting caught in the middle. Is there anything wrong with speculation? No. Except It has no place, as I've said before, in residential real estate. And when there is a time for speculation, it means that we have a boom. And the only thing you can absolutely guarantee if you have a boom is that you're going to have a bust, because the trees do not grow to the sky. Now, we can go all around and say, who's at fault here? The builder? Well, yes, no, he charged as much as he possibly could. He opened to the market and people came in and bought. The lender said, I'll do it if you follow my terms. So that everybody's sort of following the rules, carrying on, everybody's following the rules, except now the prices aren't what they were anticipated to be. But the building is up and the promises have been made and the contracts are signed and the deposits are in. So now what are you going to do? So the situation that I described before with the AHOP and the repossessions and everything, that is not quite the same, but it's nearly the same. It just hasn't, the poo hasn't hit the propeller yet. So someone is going to have to come up with an innovative idea to make those deals go through and wait for the 5 years until that 20% comes back. I think it's going to come back. Prices are going to come back. But what are you going to do in the interim? Somebody's got to wait for that 5 years for their money. The lender, yes. The builder, yes. The buyer, yes, he's got to go in there and he's got to pay. And the interest rates that are today are a direct function of interest rates being too low for too long, and the assurance given to people that you might as well borrow this money, it's so dirt cheap. They're trying to stimulate the economy, so let's do it. Let's be stimulated. And they did. And guess what happened? It backfired. It backfired. Someone was just too smart, except the person who was too smart is the very same guy who's currently the Bank of Canada and in charge of how much he's going to raise it and not care about he's going to fight inflation. He's responsible for the whole mess. He should be fired already. If they're independent of government. I'm not saying government's responsible because it's an independent agency. They have nothing to do with each other, but they were trying to stimulate the economy. They reduced interest rates too far during the pandemic. Everybody's talking about pandemic. It's not the pandemic. They were trying to stimulate the economy. But instead of dropping it to 2, why didn't they drop it to 3.5? That's plenty. If the real estate market is dead, like nobody cares where it's 2 or 4. But if you want to stimulate speculation in residential real estate, drop the interest rates to nothing and people will speculate. And what do you get? Following a boom, you get a bust. So I said I was going to ask questions and you were going to talk. But guess
I'm
what?
going to ask you another question. I'll ask you another question.
Yeah.
But before that, I always forget to ask this. This is like we're always deep into it. But if you're still watching this by now, and a lot of you still are, click on subscribe. We've hit our 100 mark. So thank you so much. Round of applause. 100 subscribers on our way up to 101, 102, 1,000. Click on the like button. Share this with your friends, family, loved ones. Educate them about real estate, and make your comments. Type your comments in. What do you think about the speculation or investing or buying pre-construction as an end user? What are your thoughts on it? Would you do it now? Or you think it's a bit risky? But before we wrap up our video, here's a question, Robert, that interests me in particular.
Okay.
There's 2 articles now about this by the same writer.
Yeah.
The headline of the most recent one is Agents Report Surge in Home Buyers, desperate to get out of deals as rates continue to soar. You and I know about the assignments, how the government's taxing assignment profit. One of the registrants in this particular article explained that, his clients got in early and they closed with no hiccups, no issues whatsoever. So they're fine. Who is this affecting today? Should somebody buy pre-construction today? And what is the agenda here to put this information out there, knowing that anybody who has bought recently is in a tide of lowering prices? Anybody who's on assignment who has bought previously and is trying to assign, they're likely suffering. What's the deal here? Like, should somebody buy an assignment today? Should somebody buy pre-con today? And what are we hoping to accomplish by educating the general public that condo prices are dropping?
Okay, real estate prices. We're so used to, since 1996, prices going up, constantly up, that for them to go down, we're not used to it. We don't know how to think that way. And so the defense mechanism of caution, like Canadians are normally very cautious, boring, especially when it comes to money, and don't take chances. But when they see everybody around them is buying 3 condos and they're all making $100,000 and it's so easy, and you just have to walk in there and they sign the paper and it's all done, and you do it on the internet. You don't even have to go there. then buying a pre-construction condo at a future price is great if what they're building will suit you at that price at that future time. You can't expect the future price to be realized because it might not. We're now experiencing that. All of these condos and everything built on, the builder was on spec. I'm planning to sell it for this amount. I'm planning to invest this much in concrete. I'm planning to save this on labor. I'm planning to for the land and the mezzanine and all this stuff. So if you're a buyer and you want to buy something at a future price, then buy it. If you need that for your own use, or if you think that you can rent that out, if that's your intention, if it's going to be part of your RSP and you're using a single piece of real estate and as a condominium unit to be part of your RSP, in 25 years, it'll be really a great deal. Perhaps in 3 years, it's going to be ugly, but in 5 years, it'll be okay. And in 10 years, it'll be all right. And then 25 years, it'll be the greatest thing you ever did. And you're glad you put up with another great story to tell your grandchildren. So, but there are many, many, many condominiums that are being constructed over the last 10 years that are impossible to live in. They don't have a parking spot. The lockers were extra. They didn't build sufficient. There's no recreational facilities. It's built to be a tenant building. When if so, then, you know, they're always building any purpose-built rentals. They are, you know, somebody built one over by Honest Ed's, stuff like here and there. But most of these condos are built 1+ den with 1.5 bath. Who can live there? Only tenants can live there. Only students can live there. So don't think you're too smart, because you know what? You're not. You will be outsmarted if you think you can outsmart the real estate market. And if you think you're smarter than a developer and the builder, you're not. You're just having a fear of losing out. And should you buy one? Yes. If you'd like it and it will be used to you. If you want to buy it and flip it, don't bother, because you will get outsmarted eventually.
Long-term view, right? And many of these condominiums, if you look at the floor plans, if you look at the exposures, and you know what they're built for, right? And they're meant to be investment condos. And if you're in this space, you know what we're talking about. And of course, the registrants who are assisting their clients do their best to find which investment pre-construction condo project may work, what floor plans work, what exposures work, what prices work. But ultimately, if you don't know what you're getting into and you're jumping in, as Robert said, just for the hype of, you know, oh, we got to buy this and this is going to lead us to riches, you may be disappointed down the road. And so you've got to know exactly what you're getting into. And the interesting note is that the model has changed. Like Robert mentioned earlier, that spec was the builder building it fully, then in hopes of selling the project out. These days, the way financing works, the spec is the investor, right? I'm putting my money in hopes that this will complete, that this will sell for higher, and I'll actually make money. So the responsibility and the risk has shifted, right? The builder doesn't make.
Correct. On purpose, they changed the rules.
Exactly. Yeah. They don't build until they know that it's going to get financed. So essentially, as a condo investor, you are financing, not the bank. The bank is jumping on board and saying, hey, that looks good. There's enough investors or enough buyers that want to go in on this. I think it's pretty safe now to give that loan, right? So that's what Robert says, by, 70% has to be sold prior to a project being started or being financed. You are the financing. You are the investor, right? You are the one fueling that project. And so if the tides shift and if the prices move, totally different story. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Real Estate Chat. This is definitely not the last discussion of this. In future episodes of Real Estate Chat, we would talk about pre-construction versus resale. What's the strategy for 2023? And, we're going to talk a lot more about using real estate to build wealth and being careful and being cautious at the same time so you don't get burned. If you have any questions, type it into the comments, read Robert's blog, read my blog, and make sure you subscribe, make sure you click like. Thank you for joining us on Real Estate Chat, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Excellent.
Bye.